Welcome to the Freedom Haven presentation. Before we start, does anyone have any questions you want to address before we start the presentation? Okay. Who's familiar with this image? Have you heard of the phrase that's attributed to Benjamin Franklin? Democracy is two wolves and a lamb voting on. Sorry, if there's a pause. It's pause good. Democracy is two wolves and a lamb voting on what's for dinner. Liberty is a well-armed lamb contesting the vote. I mean, you ever heard that phrase before? Yeah.
The first one, but not the second.
Yeah. So you can see the problems with the democracy. What the Freedom Haven Project has successfully done is it has invited more lambs to move in, essentially outvoting the wolves, and that's great. That means the lambs won't get eaten. You have success. The problem is and the result of that is New Hampshire has become the freest state in America, which is excellent. Because we have more pro-freedom people, more lambs is a bad analogy. We have more porcupines that have moved into the state and outvote the wolves. The problem is that as a state overall, there's no green on this map. This is from the last presidential election. None of the counties voted for the Libertarian president. It's all Republican and Democrats, and we're still outvoted by the two wolves. And so that means that we're still kind of ruled at a federal level no matter what we do. And in the last many years, you guys familiar with the Economic Freedom Index? The Heritage.org has been for like 30 years tracking scientifically as much as they can. Some of it is arbitrary, but it's as scientifically as they can how all the different countries in the world are doing. Judicial system, freedom of business, taxation, corruption in the government, all these different things, and ascribing a total score to that country, saying, well, how's this country doing with economic freedom in general? And it comes with the total score. The U.S. at one point in history was number one, but we've been slowly falling, and now we're number 25. The current number one, and when I say this, everyone's going to have the same response, is Singapore. Now, what's the problem with Singapore being the freest country in the world?
Dictatorship. Yeah.
Exactly, because Singapore had a rating of, I think it was 84.6 points, Economic Freedom Index, which means it actually has a 15.6% tyranny. Now, that's the smallest tyranny in the world, but it's still 15.6% tyranny. And the U.S. has fallen even more in the meantime, which means right now, New Hampshire is the number one freest state and the number 25th freest country in the world. So the Freedom Haven Project has plans to create the number one most free country in the world in 15 years.
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
It said that was from the Cato Institute, right?
Yes.
That number. It's probably not part of your presentation. I apologize. I just want to know how they get. What metric do they use to determine that? Because I think that's nonsense.
That is. If you go to look on Google for Economic Freedom Index, take it to their site and it'll show the rankings, and you click on each of the countries, and it will actually show you what information about it, and there's also a summary explaining what's got better and worse, and you can look at the details, and you can look at it in history. They have it all for the last 30 years. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
It is also normal in every country in the world for the people of that country to think they have more freedom than they actually do. Because when you lose a freedom, you resist it if you know about it. A lot of times you don't know that you've lost it, but your children won't resist anymore. Your children will think it's normal. And when you talk about restoring that freedom, they're like, "Oh my goodness, that's scary. You're gonna disaster and so forth, right?" So it's very rare that we actually have discovered more freedom than our parents did, because that's not usually how it works, and that's one of the reasons why libertarians are such a minority. because we all think that USA is the freest country in the world. It's kind of surprising when you find out it isn't, you know. But yeah, you can look at them up and they'll have more details on it. And some of it's subjective, but I thought they did a great job of trying to be scientific about it.
Okay. I'll look at it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question. The freedom that we seek can be found outside the exclusive economic zone. It's the t-shirt. Does anyone know what that means?
Saw your YouTube, so outside commercial waters,
Outside the exclusive economic zone is a term that was created by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. That's a UN convention, and we don't really care about what the UN says, right? Except the fact that this is one of those things that is in our favor, because all the countries in blue, which is like 90% of all the countries in the world, have signed this convention. The U.S. has not signed it, but they say that they're abiding by it. Now, the fact that they didn't sign it, but they're abiding by it, means that they can change their mind any time. So they're kind of a questionable. You have to keep an eye on that, But basically, what it says is that before this, the territorial waters was 3 nautical miles from shore. Basically, the distance that it can be shot to shore. So basically, if you have a ship closer to 3 nautical miles, your coastal cities are in danger. So basically, the idea is that you own 3 nautical miles of shore, because that's the distance of a cannonball. A cannonball can be fired. But have you guys heard about Rose Island in Italy? A guy went out and said, I want to have freedom. I would have loved to meet this guy. He died a couple years ago. He's a guy of my own heart. He said, I want to have freedom. And he went out and built himself an island, a floating concrete spar island, like 5 nautical miles from shore, outside of Italy's reach, and had all the freedoms that they didn't have in Italy. And so everyone was flocking there, and Italy shut it down. But they shut it down after the UN had actually started going through the process of recognizing Rose Island as an official country. They hadn't finished their paperwork, but they had started on it when Italy attacked it and sank that vessel. They didn't kill anybody, but I think a dog was killed, but that was it. But it's because of that. By the way, technically speaking, that's the only time in modern history that Italy has actually declared war against another country. But because of that, that's what kind of started this process of getting all the countries in the world to agree on what these boundaries are. So they extended territorial waters. By the way, can you read that down there, back there?
No, I got my glasses on, yeah.
Okay. The territorial waters was extended from 3 nautical miles to 12 nautical miles. And then they said, well, we'll give you a little more. We're going to give you 24 nautical miles where you can still have some of your laws apply, right? But everything out to 200 nautical miles, you still can control and regulate all floating vessels. Yada yada. What this basically means is that if you're a vessel floating within 200 nautical miles, they get to regulate you, which means they basically control you. So basically, freedom does not. What is important for us is that everything outside 200 nautical miles, there's no governance. As long as you're flying a flag that the International Maritime Organization recognizes, they'll leave you alone. So freedom, ultimate freedom, the freedom that we seek exists outside the exclusive economic zone. That's why that's so important. Any questions about that so far? I know it's all technical, but it all comes back together. It makes sense.
Is this why, like, if I want to take my kayak out, I'm supposed to register it? Because I'm in international waters and it's a vessel floating out there? Or like, even like if I buy a bigger boat or something,
if you don't have a flag, that's one of the caveats to this whole thing. Is if you do not have a flag, you're considered to be a pirate vessel, and that gives any country carte blanche to basically seize your vessel, claim that you're a pirate, and take everything you have. So basically, you cannot go out there without a flag of some kind. But on the flip side, what has happened is that countries say, well, wait a second, a ship can flag with any country they want to. Now there's a competition, a free market competition between, well, it's not free market because they're forcing you to take a flag, but still, there's competition between the countries saying, they're charging you this much, and they're having this much regulation against you. Well, we're going to charge you less and have you less regulation. So now these countries are competing with each other to try to be the least one out there. And that's why most vessels that sail on the high seas today are flagged in Panama, even though none of them have ever been to Panama, were never built in Panama, and manned by Panama crew. So they call that a flag of convenience. Now the nice thing about this is that does have certain regulations, but it only affects the ship, not the people on the ship. So anything we have out there, yes, the people who maintain the ship and run the ship will have to deal with regulators and other stuff and whatever, less of it, not as much as you would if you're in that country, but there's certain things they'd have to do. They have to keep logs of how they handle the oil and other things to make the ship engine go a certain way, but the people who live on the ship don't have to worry about that. Does that make sense? Like if you go on a cruise ship, you don't have to worry about all those regulations because the people running the cruise ship itself takes care of all that. But all this blue area is all the ocean that's outside the exclusive economic zone. Basically, more than 1/3 of the entire surface of the planet is outside the jurisdiction of existing governments, minus the flag thing. So basically, the freedom you seek exists outside the exclusive economic zone. Now, why do we say exclusive economic zone instead of saying international waters? Well, that's because the term international waters, in this diagram, the one before the outside X on it, the term international waters is not defined legally, which means everyone's using it differently, and everyone's using it wrong. Some people say it's 12 nautical miles out, some people say it's 200 nautical miles out. And because they're using it inconsistently, because there's no actual definition for it, people will have these stories that don't make sense. They always say, this country attacked this ship that was in international waters. Well, when you say international waters, you mean 12 nautical miles, but they were within 200 nautical miles, so that was actually within a jurisdiction. Long story short, if you use international waters, it causes issues, which is why we don't say international waters, we say exclusive economic zone, even though that's a mouthful, because that's the more proper term for that. But this is it right here. This whole area here is the amount of surface of the Earth that is outside exclusive economic zone. Basically, a new frontier that has yet to be colonized. Sort of, because I'll do that. It actually has been colonized to a degree, but we'll get to that in a minute. But before we go too far, we have to be clear about what we're talking about when we say freedom. Everyone says freedom for everything. You know, wow, I'm flying in the sky, that's real freedom. Oh wow, I'm suddenly wealthy, that's freedom. Yeah, when we're talking about freedom, we're talking about a very specific thing. So like, can someone define freedom? What is freedom? Exactly. That is a good definition. Okay, so to understand freedom, I find it's best to first understand what is the opposite of freedom. What does it take to destroy your freedom, right? What does it take to remove your freedom? Because it's hard to understand what freedom is without understanding what the opposite of freedom is. The opposite of freedom is force and compulsion. So what does it take to what destroys your freedom? And it basically comes down to two general areas. You're not free if you're dead. You're not free if you're in prison or kidnapped or chained somewhere or bound or whatever it is. And you're also not free, and this is a little bit more difficult to understand, but you're also not free if everything you've been worked for has been stolen or destroyed. I didn't pause it, sorry. You as an individual have individual rights, right? Well, the most core aspect of private property is your body. If you do not respect private property rights and don't respect your ownership of your own body, the rest of freedom falls apart. Now that's one of those things, because when I was younger, I kind of thought that the whole thing of respecting private property was a selfish thing, or just being greedy, whatever it was, because I was raised in a socialist country, you know, it's the way people were raised in school and stuff. But property is actually an important part of it. So if you actually destroy property if you can uphold private property rights, basically. Any questions about that? I know this is all very technical, but this is why this whole project works and how it's all built up. So the opposite of that. So if force and compulsion destroys freedom, and that's murder, kidnapping, and theft, freedom. Freedom is living life without the threat of being murdered, kidnapped, or robbed, or stolen. And there's a lot of variations, like trespassing is a form of theft as well, you know, things like that. So basically, if you have a life where no one's threatening to murder you, kidnap you or steal or rob you, you have freedom. You're just naturally born with freedom. No one has to do anything. No one has to present anything to you. You don't have to be given anything. You just naturally have freedom until someone takes it away through this. Any questions about that? So that's what we mean when we talk about freedom. Right now, these are some industries that have mega ships outside the exclusive economic zone on the high seas. Right here, this is an aircraft carrier. This is a cruise ship. This is an oil rig. And looking at this, you can tell that this is a city. I mean, whoever has been on an aircraft carrier and served time in an aircraft carrier? Okay. Who here has been on a cruise ship, especially one of the larger ones? Okay. Who here has, probably no one, but who here has been on a container ship, one of the new modern container ships? Awesome. You're just walking down and back. I mean, it's like, it's a trip. You know, it's so huge. And it's hard to imagine. You know, when I was in, I used to live in Seattle, Washington, right? When I was in Seattle, Washington, we have these 3, 4, 5-story house buildings and so forth. We're downtown Seattle. Everyone knows what downtown Seattle looks like, right? Now imagine we're downtown Seattle. I'm getting lunch and going back to work, and I look up, and behind it, who's seen the movie Independence Day? Right, you know, the big spaceship looming overhead, right? That's what it was like when a cruise ship visits Seattle, because you're like, oh wow, this is the Seattle skyline, and whoa, what is that? That's a cruise ship. This is a 17 or 20 story tall building that's many, many blocks wide that just dominates the landscape. So you get it. It's hard for you to, unless you've actually seen it, to fathom how big these are, and these are actually floating cities. So we have the technology. We've been making floating cities for decades. This is not something new. We don't have to be innovative to figure out some way to do this. We're already doing this. The problem is that all these industries are focusing on something very specific, and none of them are providing you the freedom that exists outside the exclusive economic zone. Does that make sense? So, like a cruise ship, they want you to have fun and enjoy and so forth. You're not doing that so you can go out there and smoke crack or you know, build your guns or start your own business. That's not in their business model. They might let you do certain things, but for the most part, it's not. And in the Navy, you definitely don't have more freedom when you're out there. And an oil rig, the same way, you're subject to whatever the rules are of the parent company. So even though these ships exist and this technology exists, the industry provided to people like us does not exist today. So really quick, I want to give an idea of what these vessels are and how much they cost, and get a scale of what they are. The U.S. Gerald R4 aircraft carrier had a cost of $17.5 billion. It has a max population of 4.5 thousand people, and the per person cost, if you divide that into that, is $3.8 million per person. The length is 333 meters, which is huge. That's basically like a third the length of PorcFest. You know, when you walk all the way across, it's like about 1.5 football feels long. Oh wait, that's not right. It's like 3 football fields. Yes, I'm sorry. Scratch that. It has 24 decks, layers, but $17.5 billion. This is too expensive for what we're looking for. The next one is the Symphony of the Seas, largest cruise ship currently created. It has a cost of $1.35 billion. It has a total population of 8,880 people. That includes the workers. One thing you don't realize is that, yes, the people who visit cruise ships are only there for a week and they come and go, but for every person that's on a cruise ship, there's like almost one entire worker that corresponds to them. So like, I think there's like maybe 5,000 people that are tourists on a cruise ship, and there's like 3,800 that are actually the workers. And these workers live and work here. The last one is, the second last one is HMM Algiers container ship. This container ship is huge, and these are really cheap. They cost about $160 million to $180 million. Compared to the other ships, it's incredibly cheap. It has a population of about 20 to 25 people, so a very, very small population, which means it costs $6 to $9 million per person for that ship. So that's not really ideal, but what's interesting about this is all the space that's on there, right? What if you tweak this? What if you, instead of having containers, you turn those into office spaces and you basically make a huge city with that kind of simplicity, right? It's length of 400 meters, 20 decks, and there's basically 80 acres of space on that ship. That's huge. And there's oil rigs out there, oil platforms. Oil platforms have a huge range, and it's hard to get their actual price because there's it's all confidential. You know, the equipment they use, everything else they do is confidential. So all we have is estimates that happen. We do know that Elon Musk bought one for $2 million recently, used one. So that's the lowest end. I mean, amazing.
$2 million?
$2 million, an old used one. Population ranges from 10 to 200 people. The per person costs between $200,000 to $15 million per person. It's not really economical that much. Even though everyone always thinks about oil rigs, how oil rigs are so cool, they're very expensive and they aren't as cheap as the monohulls. These are very expensive platforms that are only built because there's billions of dollars of oil right below you. Otherwise, they wouldn't be building these things because they just cost too much. And this is initial design of what we're planning to build. And this is the Freedom Haven's new Liberty vessel. And its estimated cost is $260 billion, which includes 10 years of maintenance and all the supporting components like 2 ocean-going sea tugs and so forth. It has the main section that's very similar to a container ship, except that it has been optimized for living in. Much wider hallways, and you have utilities running the whole ship and floors going the whole thing. So it's basically like a huge office, apartment, manufacturing, industrial complex. Basically the ultimate location for a free market. There are.
I'm sorry. Is this like basically like seasteading? Is that what you're talking about a little bit?
This
or what's
this
the
is
difference between that and this?
Technically this is seasteading, yes.
Okay.
The difference is that most seasteading nowadays that people talk about is living in some fancy, luxurious, rich person's house in a harbor somewhere. In the harbor, first of all, it's a sheltered harbor. The waves aren't that high, and so you could afford to just have one person there because your shore is like 10 feet away. You just go on the shore and put your groceries and come there. You're not really living on the ocean. On the high seas, the waves can get up to 5 meters high. At the location we're looking at, the North Sea can get up to 50 meters, which is why we're not thinking about the North Sea. But that's why they have bigger vessels out there, because the larger you are, you can have smaller ships out there, but the smaller your ship is, the bigger the waves are in comparison. And that's where you have the salty sailor and having sailor's legs to be able to live and thrive on the thrashings of the North Sea in a smaller vessel. But the larger ships, cruise ships don't complain about, passengers don't complain about seasickness and so forth, because the ship's so massive that the ocean is calm in comparison. So that's one reason for going big. Another one is having the minimal thriving market. Like if you have 2 people living out somewhere, how much of a local thriving market can you have there, right? In the internet, you kind of have more options. But the more you have, like here at PorcFest, you have like almost 3,000 people here, right? Imagine PorcFest where there's only 30 people here. Would you have as much interaction, as much trading going on? There's a certain critical mass you need before you can actually have all that trading going on. Does that make sense? So this has that. Any questions about this before we move on?
I'm having a hard time figuring out what I'm looking at here.
This is like the main section of a cruise ship or a container ship. It's just simple. It's got 17 decks.
Okay.
We have a cross section inside. It's all on freedomhaven.org. Has all the designs. You can download them yourself and other videos. We actually have an 18-minute video that goes through the detail of the whole project. A lot more details. This is the main ship here. This is a floating harbor with a wall that goes down into the water. So this is the water here. And the idea is that it will stop the wave energy from going through, which means everything on the harbor would be calm. So even if the seas are roughing outside, this is a safe haven for ships to come in. And then everything on the lean side of and this would face towards wherever the storm waves are coming in. Wherever the storm is, the pinnacle, the source of where the waves are coming, we face towards that. And then the safe harbor is able to be protected, and then the ship itself means that anything behind the ship, like another container vessel or whatever, would be protected as well. So this would actually be a port that container ships and stuff would come to and bring stuff to us. Like you could order stuff on Amazon, and it would still arrive, and it may take like a couple days or a week later.
Okay, so those are docks like in the middle.
Yeah, this is a harbor. This is with ships, and this is without ships.
Yep.
I had to do
Coming
both.
together now.
This puts context and size. But people were getting confused when they first saw this one. They're like, "Wow, you have an aircraft carrier?" It's like, no, we don't have $17.5 billion for an aircraft carrier. It'd be cool. We wish we did, but no.
But one could visit, it looks like.
Yes, definitely.
So,
And these are some ships in the harbor, and some. Right here we have a $7 million project as part of the thing of these floating concrete platforms.
Okay.
It's kind of prototype. It's experimental. It has the potential of being even cheaper, but we don't know if it's really going to work. I mean, it's possible these things hit each other in waves that it crack and it sinks. Well, they go, there goes that, So it's experimental, but it may or may not work. Which is why we're not basing the whole thing off of that. It's just kind of an extension. This might be a nice park or so forth. Yeah.
What are the concrete platforms for?
Just an extension. Have an open park. Enough of these lined up. If it's like 5 kilometers long, you could have yourself an airport, a runway. Yeah, airplane strip. But currently, this would just be a nice space for an open park or other housing if you want, and other things can dock with it as well. It's just all very high level. The project itself is very intricate, and even though we've gone through a lot of technical stuff here, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much going on in this project. We've been working on this for 4 years now, so it's a lot involved. And this is again the 3 different kinds of ships. We don't have the oil platforms here because that's not really what we're considering. We have the USS Gerald R. Ford, which is $17.5 billion. Symphony of the Seas cruise ship, $1.3 billion. The container ship, which is $160 to $180 billion, and then the new Liberty vessel, which is $260 billion. So this is more expensive than just a container ship, but we're not going to be living on a container ship. We'll be living in an actual city. So, even though it's more inhabitable, it's more livable.
You meant 260 million.
Yes.
How much is a cruise ship worth after 20 years?
Probably very little. I don't know the actual lifespan. Every metal ship on the seas eventually succumbs to the ocean. They all do. At some point, you get to the point where it's cheaper to buy a new ship than it is to maintain the existing one, because the steel, once rust gets a hold of the steel, it basically just propagates through the whole ship, and the ship is, that's why it's one reason why buying used ships is not really a good solution either, because the reason why they're selling it oftentimes is because it's full of rust, and the maintenance is cost more than them just buying a new ship, which is why they're selling it to you. So it's one of those, kind of be careful. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
So what's the plan for long-term maintenance then?
That's actually included in the price. we actually have a 10 years. So basically, of that $260 million, $40 million of that is put into a, I forget this term. What's it called when you your property taxes be put in each month, and then every 6 months or a year they actually what? Escrow. Thank you. We'll have an escrow set aside for 10 years. They'll have $40 million into it. That's $4 million a year towards maintenance and security, and probably have a crew of like 20 people actually maintain the basics of the vessel during that time.
You believe 20 people would be enough?
It's definitely pushing it, but that is something we're hoping for. It's a goal. And with the freedom we have there, we hope that we could be more efficient than we have today.
Yeah.
Maybe it's more. but we hope that 20 is going to be enough.
Something else, you mentioned the platforms that you were trying to connect for extra space, and you mentioned maybe having a park there or something like that. Do you have, I'm pretty sure like humans really need nature and stuff like that to keep them sane.
Exactly,
So,
yeah.
what's the plan with the park thing? Do you have something in mind? Or
Well, nothing specific. I envision in my mind that how you could utilize that space to have trees and paths and think of
like a city that has trees in it. Like
exactly.
maybe
What's
with
the name of that park in New York? The famous park. Central Park. Think of Central Park. That's a small space in in New York, and they've optimized it to make it more comfortable and people like just hang out there. And that's kind of what we're thinking of. Did you have a specific idea yourself, or?
No, just interesting.
Yeah. And if this works, this may actually become the future of spreading out, of having these platforms. But like I said, it's experimental, so it's kind of you don't want to put all your eggs in that basket yet.
Exactly.
This is the vessel in comparison to PorcFest. Give you an idea how big it is. But it's not one story like PorcFest is. It's 17 stories high, which means it's. I mean that tree there is only 5 stories tall. I mean it's 3.5 times as tall as that tree. It's a huge building. It's hard to just imagine how big that is. So the Freedom Haven project plan is to build upon the world's contractual agreement through the United Nations Convention of Law on the Sea that their government's jurisdictions end and our freedoms begin 200 nautical miles from shore. So that the plan is to build upon that, create a business model that maximizes freedom through the voluntary contractual restriction of forced compulsion to the minimal amount needed for self-defense of life, freedom, and property, which means basically the service that New Liberty is providing to people who actually live there is that the only thing that's illegal is murder, kidnapping, and theft. And the variations. For example, rape is kind of a combination of kidnapping and theft, and arson and things like that. So, and we actually have a constitution that goes into specifics, or a contract, if you want to look at it that way, that goes into specific exactly what we mean and what the layout is. It's essentially, it's the non-aggression principle, and also the don't hurt anybody and don't steal their stuff. That famous teacher we have around here. We also want to utilize existing shipyards like Samsung Heavy Industries, who already build the world's most economical megaships, and have them design and build the megaship, the New Liberty vessel that fits our needs. And we're doing this to create a permanent, growing, thriving, free market city outside the exclusive economic zone called Freedom Haven. Freedom Haven is the name of the country that will have multiple vessels. Each vessel will kind of be its own state, if that makes sense. So they'll all implement the same contract or constitution, however you want to do that. It basically limits that you may not murder, kidnap, and steal, but they can do it in their own specific ways and have their own specific ways of getting security and so forth. So if you go there with your own ship, you're going to have your own. You'll be seen as your own province in a sense. And eventually, our goal is to be recognized as our own country. And it's just an example flag. We're still designing that. If you have better designs, we're accepting. Basically, the 13 stripes is the classical liberal foundation that our freedom was built on. The founding fathers, Statue of Liberty, which actually this is not. We in America see this as an American symbol. But people in the rest of the country don't see it as an American symbol, they see it as a symbol of freedom, because they realize that this is a French-made flag of an Italian goddess named Libertas that was given to America, and this statue exists all over the world. Ours is the biggest and the most popular one, but they have like 20 or so instances of this statue all over the world. So it's we think of it as a symbol of America, but really it's a symbol of freedom to the rest of the world. And the yellow and black. Who can say what the yellow and black stands for?
Narco-capitalism.
Exactly. to be recognized as an actual country, according to the Montevideo Convention, the Montevideo Convention, it's kind of international law, says the state as a person of international law should possess the following qualifications: a permanent population, which we'll have, a defined territory, which is kind of a great thing because usually they mean territory as in land, but we will have a territory, but it's a floating territory, but we'll try to, and we'll have a government, which is kind of the technicality. We'll have that contract that people sign that will not murder, kidnap, and steal. And if you do those things and you don't fix what you broke, you'll be kicked out. Whether that's a government or not is kind of a technicality, but because we won't have a monopoly on force, but we will have security that if you break those laws, which are very few, don't murder, kidnap, and steal, you will be locked up, thrown into a prison, go before a judge, and it will feel like a government to anyone else. What? Well, hopefully we have to first find out if they're guilty or not. And the capacity to enter into relations with other states. We will have all of those, although the territory is kind of what we're still working on. So hopefully the goal long term is that we will actually be recognized as our own country and have our own flag. And that's it for the presentation. Any questions on this? Thank you.
Curiosity if you have addressed the issue of potential outside attackers, other ships from other countries. Would there be some sort of false flag towards you guys to make it look bad, to discourage other people from doing certain things?
Very good question. And we actually just answered it right before we started. We had a little question and answer session. We will have the firepower to stop pirates and cartels and so forth, because like here, if someone came in and wanted to do a stick up here in PorcFest, that might actually be entertaining. We're like, need some popcorn, this is gonna be good. We're gonna see how this is gonna turn out, So it's gonna be like that, but even more so there, because we're doing some things under the covers here, but there it will all be completely legal and open. You can manufacture whatever weapon you want. You don't need to register, concealed or not concealed, it doesn't matter, because you have the right to defend yourself any way you decide. As long as you don't threaten someone else's life.
Open source defense.
What?
Open source defense.
Exactly.
And so, torpedo capabilities.
Yes, that is where it gets tricky. When it comes to navies, we will be as vulnerable to foreign nations' navies as any other small island nation is today. Any small island nation today, any of a number of countries can push a button and that nation just disappears, or they conquer it. So how do those small nations handle not being taken over by their big brothers of the international community? How we're thinking about doing it is basically a three-step approach. One is we'll have diplomacy. We'll actually have 2 full-time diplomats that will go to the UN and to the countries and try to have, because when goods don't cross borders, soldiers often do. So we'll have open trade with the world. In the world today, you can't trade. Countries don't trade with each other unless they have an agreement to trade certain things. But we basically, the government's not going to be the government in Freedom Haven won't be dictating anything with the economy. So we'll have by default open trade with everybody. And so hopefully that will mean that we'll have good relationships with all the countries that we trade with. So that's one, diplomacy, and the fact that we're actually armed, very heavily armed, and they don't who has arms will make it very difficult for them to conquer us. It doesn't mean that it won't stop them from sending one Tomahawk missile that would take out our country. We really can't stop that. But one thing we can do you guys, which is why it's a little long, are you guys familiar with why we, in Desert Storm, when we had gone like 80% of the way to Baghdad, we suddenly just stopped and left Iraq and didn't actually finish conquering Iraq during Desert Storm? Does anyone know why? That was what? That was the first war. That was shortly after CNN was created initially. Back when CNN was actually a good media company, and the war was being broadcast to the world in real time. And when Americans actually, for the first time, saw a war, and it was very bloody, but that's the way wars always are. But that was the first time we actually saw that. We didn't have the stomach for it, and popularity support of the war went way down to the point that the American government said, this is very unpopular, no one likes this, we just need to leave. So basically, we were kept from taking over Iraq at that point because of one thing, and that was visibility into the war, which is one of the reasons why whenever a country invades another country, they knock out communications initially. And why, do you guys know what happened with Elon Musk in Ukraine with Starlink?
I heard about Starlink, but then
Starlink is amazing. I have Starlink at home. It's amazing. Basically, you have high-speed internet. This is not an advertisement. That technology exists, basically. When Russia invaded Ukraine, they started knocking out all their communications, which every country does when they invade another country. They knock out the communications so no one can see what's going on, so you don't have the public support against what you're doing. Elon Musk flew in a bunch of these Starlinks, these satellites, which give you instant communication. You have a portable generator and a Starlink, which actually they're talking about doing here. Which means you have.
No, I was just going to sign up to be a beta tester a while back, and I wish I would have pulled the trigger on it.
Yeah, I signed up for that, and
Okay.
it's awesome. They don't have all the satellites yet, so there's a couple of blips every now and then. You lose the internet for a couple seconds every couple hours. But so if you're streaming with somebody, you're like, oh, you just got lost, you have to reconnect. It's a pain, but it's still fast internet. So basically, what happened in Ukraine is now everyone in the world can see what's happening in Ukraine in real time, all the time, and that's actually a discouragement to Russia attacking because everyone can see it. So basically, the three things we're doing to try to dissuade other countries from attacking us is diplomacy and open trade and trying to be friends with everybody. The fact that we'll have open visibility 24/7. We'll have a live stream, a webcam, so it's much more better than that. Where it basically shows all the things that are happening in Freedom Haven on a daily basis. This is great. What happens over here? This event happened. Kind of like. Whatever it is, but basically it allows the world to actually see what's really going on in Freedom Haven. So if there's a propaganda campaign to try to say, oh, Freedom Haven is evil, all these things happen, whatever it is, people say, well, I look at it and says, that's not true. I can see Freedom Haven right now. I can watch it. I can ask them questions. I can interact with the people there. I can see what it's like to actually be there right now, and I can see that that's not true. So having that visibility, and the third one is the fact that we're all armed, will hopefully be a dissuasion. Would dissuade anyone from attacking us, but it is a complicated issue. But we hope that would be as successful as other small nations are today at not being attacked.
What about like bartering with other countries as a protectors or something like that?
If any vessel wants to do that, that's their choice. Freedom Haven has no. It has, as a government, it has no control over the individuals of the people. It can't say, well, guess what? If you as a neighboring country did this for us, we're going to give you everyone this side of the room. We're going to tax them a certain amount. No, we have no. The Constitution set up a way to specifically limit what force government does. So basically, you are all individuals. You have all your rights. There's no taxation. Everything's going to be paid out of that fund of $40 million we're setting aside for the security. Basically, and basically, yeah. So you'll have nothing to barter with. You'll have if an individual vessel says, I want to pay for this Navy, I'll pay you X million dollars a year to actually help protect us. Sure, if that vessel wants to do that, but it doesn't speak for the people. It has to use its own private funds for that. Any other questions? This is excellent, by the way. I love questions, and this is a very deep project. I mean, deep understanding. There's so many layers. There's so many good questions that we've been working on for the last 4 years. So our website is freedomhaven.org. Check us out. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're all over the place. And we have a monthly meeting where we discuss this. One of our goals. One thing we didn't mention is that this project is huge in scale. And we're growing. We're doubling each year. The amount of people involved, the amount of interest in it doubles in capacity each year. At the current rate of growth, it'll be about 15 years when this thing actually is built. So this is a long-term project. The current phase right now, phase 2, is a marketing phase. The goal is to earn up $20,000 towards marketing to let more people know about it, which is what PorcFest is. You guys being here, that's one of the reasons we're doing it. So one of the goals we have at PorcFest is actually to find 200 people who says, I like that project. It may not be for me, or it may be for me, well, it doesn't matter, but I like that project and I hope you're successful with it. I'm willing to put $5 down towards marketing, and that would be our success for this year. And that'll be the next step of doubling each year as you go through it. And if we keep that pace up, in 15 years this thing will exist. So if you guys are interested in it and this is something you like to support, please consider donating $5 on our website. Plan is use that Bitcoin, Venmo, Patreon, PayPal, cash, even silver. any of that stuff. So
How big's the team that's like working on it? Are you based out of New Hampshire? Like where you mentioned you guys?
we're all over the world.
Okay.
I'm the chief architect. Me and a few other people help design initially. I spend 20 hours a week. I have a day job. I'm not paid. This is all volunteer work. And when you're talking about volunteer work, it's not like a company where you're going to say, well, this person put this many hours in. You basically say, well, we need this help. Well, he's busy, or this person can help, and that's kind of how it goes. You know, we have about 700 people online in Facebook group, and we post stuff and talk about it and discuss it, and that's very helpful. But it's all a very volunteer organization. As we get bigger and as we get more funny and get to a certain scale, it's going to be more like an actual company. But right now, it's just a bunch of volunteers. I have a day job. I work 40 hours a week, and I spend an additional 20 hours a week on the Freedom Haven project doing what I can. And other people will donate their certain amount of time in that as well. And we also love volunteers. If you guys want to volunteer your time, help me with the project, that'd be great too. So I have my business card. It has information. You want to find out more about it. Any other questions?
I'll take a card.
Okay. Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you.
Do you guys have like a space in mind where like you would initially launch that you're thinking of, or?
We're thinking of the South Bay of Bengal because of its. Thank you. Because of its. Thank you. Most 70% of all the traffic in the world goes through there, which means that if we're a port there, they could take an hour out of their schedule to just stop over here, trade a few things, and move on. And so you can still trade and still get your cheap produce and stuff. Anything else on the card? Thank you. Thanks, guys.
I'll take one.
Thank you.
Good presentation.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm curious if you guys are already working on. You guys should be the number one provider of sea salts, in the world, because you're going to need fresh water. So you should just get some machines that'll gravity pull the salt out. You guys get fresh water, and then you can sell the byproduct.
Having a free market, everyone's going to innovate and find creative solutions. It's going to be amazing. I'm so excited to see that.
I didn't want to come off as like heckling or anything, but by any chance, have you ever watched Babylon 5?
Yes.
So as I'm listening to you talk, I'm thinking about like a little after, midway through season 3 when it really gets going.
Yes.
Especially once you got into the defense and stuff, because that's right. Do not want to mess with this. People want to come through.
Yes.
Like they know they can come to places like this for when they really need stuff done. That's where the real workers are. So they're going to be coming in and hiring us to come and handle their business. And it's like,
and with this project, heckling is sincere heckling. If you have a sincere concern or anything like that, please tell us, because over 4 years we've matured a lot. The initial design we had 4 years ago is terrible. I mean, it's a joke. The initial, when we first sat down and said, well, how can we build the ship? What we're going to do with it? Before we actually did the math and said, well, how much is it going to weigh? What's the displacement and so forth? I said, wow, it doesn't display enough water to actually account for its weight. This thing's going to sink. So basically, it was terrible. So the only way we did that is to go through 4 years of that's stupid, that's terrible, and we refined our project over the course of time. So if there's anything you guys notice that you have questions about or concerns about, please tell us, because you may see something we haven't, and that makes the project great.
Who's like who made that model? Are you in touch with the person who?
I made it.
Okay.
And it's made in FreeCAD. The model is all available online. This is open design, Freedom Haven Network. So if you want to download it or even run with it and have your own designs, whatever you want.
That's awesome. I've got FreeCAD, so I'll be able to check out the actual project structure and everything.
One thing that may stand out is that this structure does not have a bow. That's because we're going to be parked in a place where the ocean current is so slow that it didn't. I'm still wondering if we need a bow because it didn't look right without a bow. But people are saying that you're parked in a place where there's no ocean current. You're not really fighting anything.
No front to it. We were talking about boats on the way down here. What's the starboard side?
There's no front to it. Especially because where we head is different from where the waves are, and we're going to be rotating towards where the waves come in. And the structure inside is very block oriented, because even though ships, all the ships we see, the front is very tapered and the back is very tapered. If you slice down the middle, it's a box. It very quickly goes from this complicated thing to a box to a complicated thing at the end. And without needing the front or the end, you're just looking at the box, which is why it looks like a box. So it's not just that we're bad designers. That's the design on purpose, because that's the ultimate design for these structures. So.
Is there a CNC? Command and control?
Oh yes, there is. Actually, two of them, both sides of the top. So. And
I can't wait to look at the model. The website and everything.
Awesome.
Do you have any marine architects involved in it?
Voluntary through the group. There's 700 people in the group, and there are a lot of people who bring in expertise. Like some people actually live on the ocean. We have Chad and Nadia, who actually created what they call the world's first seastead. A lot of the other seasteading groups are part of our group as well, and friends with ours, and they bounce certain ideas off of.
Thank you for the presentation. It was
Awesome.
wonderful.
And don't forget free pancakes tomorrow, 8 to 10.
Yeah, I saw that. I happened to notice that. I want to get.
Oh, I didn't tell you. Did I tell you this group about that at all?
You mentioned it at the beginning.
Oh, okay.
Well, we did kind of straggle in a little bit later, but I happened to notice the free pancake thing, and I was like, oh, that's the thing that we're going to.
Yeah. So 8 to 10 every day. We're gonna make 250 to 300 pancakes. Bring an appetite.
In this area?
Oh, it's 246.
Then we can geek out a little bit more.
Yes, definitely. Thank you very much.
Where's the majority of that original lump sum of money? You said the
100.
the repairs.
Yeah.
Like, are all included.
Basically, the government, what the government,
The tech
government, and that's why. I'm sorry. Go ahead and stop this.